to be joined by Robert Hine from BSI Group. Robert will be talking about ISO 27001, the changes and what they mean for you and your business. We're also joined by our very own Professor of Communicating Cyber, Gary Hibbard. He'll be fielding your questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to type them into the chat and we'll try to get around to all of them. In the meantime, without any further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Robert Hine from BSI Group.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin, and good morning, everybody, wherever you are. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As Kevin said, I'm Rob Hine. I'm the head of commercial partnerships actually at BSI, which means I have a quite very broad spectrum of knowledge of different standards and different sectors. So I wouldn't consider myself to be an in-depth expert on information security, but I can certainly manage my way through the presentation today. So yeah, it's nice to meet you all, and thanks again to Cyberfort for allowing me to present at their event today. It's much appreciated. Cyberfort are of course one of the associate consultants for BSI and can assist organizations through the implementation process for a variety of standards around information security. The eagle-eyed of you today may have noticed that the slide is referencing ISO 27002 and not ISO 27001, and the reason for that is primarily that the changes to ISO 27001 are implemented to reflect the changes in 27002. So actually the more important aspect of the changes is around the security control standard, which I'm going to take you through. And then we'll touch on a little bit about the publication of 27001 towards the end. So hopefully you can see the slides there. The 27002 standard is for the information security controls, and these are obviously the controls that are implemented by an organization to address and mitigate cyber threat. The information management system based for this standard is based on ISO 27001. So if you have 27001 implemented as an organization, 27002 is the platform you use to implement the controls and its implementation on best practice, as it says there. And developing organization information security management guidelines. So that's what the standard effectively does. The original standard 27002 was published back in 2013, or the last version in 2013, which in technological terms is a millennium. So it was overdue really for an update, and was published in this, well, it was published at the start of 22. So you have 27001 2022. And the old standard had 114 controls in it. This new standard has only 93. But as we go through, you'll see actually that there are actually more controls in here than the old standard, because some of them have been merged. Basically, you have down the left-hand side here of the slide, you can see the categorizations of these controls and what we call themes. So we have organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. So organizations should determine which of the controls are applicable to their organization, dependent upon the benefits that they see from implementing those controls. And if you are using 27001, then of course that will create a risk assessment, which will drive you to identify the applicable controls that you need to implement there. The order that they're published here is not significant. I think they're done alphabetically, so there's no significance in the way that they're put into the clauses there, clause 5, 6, 7, and 8. But you can see clause 5 there, there's 37 controls for organizational control. 34 of those were existing in the 2013 standard, and 3 of them are new. There are 6 people controls, 8 of all of which are, Clause 6 has people controls, of which there are 8, and they're all existing controls, so they were all found in the old standard. Physical controls, there are 14, 13 existing and 1 new. And technological controls, there are 34, 27 existing and 7 new. So let's have a look. Before we go on to that, I just want to talk a little bit about attributes. You can see here that what we have is control attributes. Now, these are what used to be called control objectives, and they define the purpose and the benefit of a particular control. And you can see they have a hashtag there, so they'll be searchable as well. Now, attributes are not mandatory. You don't have to use them. You certainly don't have to use the prescribed ones. Some of them may be more applicable than others, and you can determine as an organization which attributes to apply to controls, depending upon the benefit that you derive of them as an organization. So let's look at the 11 new controls that have been introduced. As I said, 2013 was a long time ago. Technologically, things have changed quite a lot. So it was necessary to, when the standard was reviewed, to introduce some new controls to address the new threats. I won't go through them all 11 here, as you can see them on the screen, but looking at the ICT continuity one here, for example, we consider the requirements before, during, and after disruption. So it looks at the disruption of ICT services rather than the information security aspect of business continuity, which was the consideration of the clause 17 of the previous edition. So you can see that they've introduced these new controls here to address new scenarios and new threats. Updated controls, there's a handy table here that looks at there's 58 of these. So what we've basically done is we've taken the old controls from 2013 standard and tweaked them to make them applicable. And you can cross-reference them forwards and backwards here between 2013 and 2022 standard. 24 of the old controls have been merged into one. So these controls that were coexisting, either they were inseparable or they were very, very closely related. So we took those controls and merged them into one. So you can see, although we only have 93 controls now in the 2022 version, they're actually the control basically functionality is much more robust, and if you separated these out, you'd have more controls than we had in the incumbent previous standard there. So there is a handy table to assist in aligning controls and helping with a bit of a gap analysis in Appendix B of the 27002 standard. And you can map both forwards and backwards between the controls in the 2013 and the 2022 standard. So that's quite a handy thing to have if you're already using 27001 and the controls as detailed in the old standard, you can map them across to make sure that they're still relevant. Of course, really the beauty of this is it gives you the opportunity to make sure that your information security systems are more robust. So by implementing the new ones and the revised controls, you can increase your mitigation against cyber threat. So control attributes, we talked a little bit about those. Each of the 93 controls will be tagged with 5 of these attributes. And you can see here what we classified them as: control type, information security property, cybersecurity concepts, operational capabilities, and security domains. This will allow the fact that they put them into types, and this can allow organizations to manage and filter and sort and present controls in different ways. And each attribute value, as I said, is preceded by a hashtag, which makes them searchable. As I said before, like, the attributes are not mandatory and they may not be fit for purpose, but I'm going to take you through each of these control attribute types just to give you a quick overview of them in a bit more detail. So we've got the control type of attribute here. We've got detective, preventative, and corrective. Obviously, preventative is what you put in before you encounter a situation of information security. And both detective and corrective occur after an incident. Information security properties. So the attribute views the control from the perspective of which these 3 characteristics of information information that the control will be preserving. So the CIA there, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is the property that information is not made available or disclosed to unauthorized individuals, entities, or processes. Integrity is all about safeguarding the accuracy and completeness of assets. And availability is obviously making information accessible and usable upon demand by an authorized entity. Moving on to cybersecurity concepts, this reference another standard here, 27110. These attributes here are viewed in relation to the cybersecurity concepts which are defined in the cybersecurity framework as described in this standard 27110. Operational capabilities. So, you know, ISO 27001 is quite a flexible standard. It's applicable to any organization and any sector of any size. These operational capabilities allow controls to be viewed from the practitioner's perspective of information security capabilities, and actually links with the 15 categories from the old 2013 version of 27002. Then you've got security domains. So this is an attribute to view controls from the perspective of information security domains, expertise, services, and also products. And you have governance, ecosystem protection, defense, and resilience. So this is just an example that's actually put into Annex A.1, and it talks a little bit around, you know, this flexibility of the attributes and the controls that are implemented there. So, you know, as I mentioned before, the big strength about the 27 family is its flexibility. The 5 attributes we've been talking about here are considered to be generic enough to meet that sort of brief of flexibility. But we also understand that these attributes may not go far enough, or they might not be relevant to an organization. So as an organization, you can choose to disregard one or all of the attributes, and you may wish to add attributes of your own. So you can actually do that. That's how flexible the standard is. For these examples of what an organization may wish to do under their control set, as I said before, if you have a risk treatment plan for 27001, then that will drive a risk assessment, which will help you to identify and link to those 93 controls and see which ones are more applicable. So what's next? So the amendment for 27001 2013 is expected later this year. Now, I can't, as BSI, we don't have control over the publication date of international standards. That's all managed by ISO. Obviously, we work with them quite closely. I should have said at the start that I sit on the assurance side of BSI, and my cousins from the standards body sit on the knowledge side of the organization, which is ring-fenced through a code of operational practice. So they would be closer to this, and they may have better indications of when the publication date is. But when I asked the question, I was told sometime between now and October this year, which I appreciate is quite vague. But you can see that basically the reason for updating the 27001 standard is primarily to reflect the changes in these controls and to introduce this concept of attributes rather than the original version in 2013. So we're expecting 27001 standard to be published relatively soon. Apologies, I couldn't be more accurate than that in the assessment of publication date. So yes, I think that's the end of my slide deck, which was a bit quick, I think. But as I said before, I'm not a technical expert on 27001. I leave that to people like Gary, who are more versed with the standard. I'll hand back to you, Kevin.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. That's really informative. Thank you. I'm sure everyone on the call will have questions about that. As with any change like this, it has a material impact to our processes and what we do. We've had some come through already. Gary, do you mind if I start firing them over?
This is they're hopefully they're for me as well as Rob. So yeah, absolutely, throw them over. And I've noticed, without naming anyone, I've noticed the number of our sales team on here, which is awesome. So it's good to know that our sales team are as interested in this as anyone else. So I'm hoping to see some of the questions from our team as well. So this will be good. So
I'm sure
yeah, fire them over.
Yeah, sure. A really kind of like overarching question for both you, Gary and Rob, is what is the biggest challenge people will have with this standard?
Okay, I'm going to give Rob opportunity to have a think on that one.
Okay.
But I'll from my perspective, from what I see, is I think it's not a cosmetic change. So ISO 27001, the last change it had in any way was from 2005 to 2013. There was a cosmetic change in 2017, but this is a fundamental shift. I think with the new controls that Rob's just mentioned there, I think that there is a real change, step change in this. It's gone from 114 controls down to 93, and some real fundamental wording changes as well. Which changed the meaning of some of the key clauses in there. So yeah, it's a big change. That's the key message, and I think organizations need to go back to basics, I think, on that, and that will be the big challenge. Rob, what's your thoughts?
So implementing new standards when you already have a certification in place, and I guess this is where it will be carry the most impact from our perspective, is how do you make that transition from the old to the new? And generally speaking, good certification bodies will work with you in that process. We're very restricted in what we can do in returns in terms of guidance, because we can't tell people how to meet the requirements of a standard and then certify them based on what we've told them, because that would represent a conflict of interest, which is where people like Gary and his organization come in. But what we tend to do is during a transitional period is we would look at we would assess against the old standard and then do a kind of gap analysis during the audit of the new standard. And then we would assess against the new standard on the following assessment visit. So we try to make it as seamless and painless as possible. But obviously with fundamental changes like this, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So you may need some external support in doing that process.
It leads on to another question we've just had in, Rob or Gary, is how long will organizations have to transition?
Rob?
It's a good question. I don't actually have the answer to that at the moment. I'm not sure if that's been determined yet, but I will find out. And if there is a transition period, I will let you know what it is, and you can forward that through to the delegates today.
I think based on history, on other standards, the typical sort of timeline, it's not immediate. It's between 18 to 24 months, because you've got to remember that people are in the middle of certification and their certification cycles. So, it's not like if you've just become certified, then all the hard work that you've done now is suddenly going to waste. So
no, absolutely.
So yeah, so typically, when we've seen going from British standards to international standards, and then certainly from when it moved from 2005 to 2013, I think it was between 18 and 24 months.
Yeah, I have seen instances where it's only 12 months, but obviously that it's dependent upon the impact of the changes and certification cycles and a number of other variables as well. Resource will be a good one. So yeah, so we'll find out for sure as soon as we find out what the transition timing will be, we can let you know.
Great, thank you. One that's come in, looks an interesting question. Is not auditing against the controls themselves too one-dimensional?
It's a good question. I'll let Gary answer that first.
It depends how good your auditing process is, I guess. I mean, certainly you should take into effect other factors. So, for instance, when I'm auditing organisations against 27001, and they've elected to use Annex A controls that are within the standard, then I'm looking for compliance against not just the standard itself, but also compliance with their own policies and procedures. So what are they saying? What are they doing within their organisation? But also it's based on best practice. So this is something that the BSI can't do and other certifications bodies can't because they're not consultants. When I'm auditing, I'm looking also at demonstration of good practice, best practice in some respects against other frameworks. Like if I'm looking at the business continuity piece, and it might be against ISO 22301, or it might be against Cyber Essentials or NIST controls, if it's more of a technical aspect, or just general governance, risk and compliance. So again, ISO 31000 from a risk management perspective. So if your audit is one-dimensional, it's only because of the quality of the audit itself that is in question. I think you need to select a good auditor or a good auditing process, I guess.
Yeah, and I would back up what Gary was talking about there in relation to processes, because the controls are, you have to view them as kind of a tool. What we're really looking at when we do the audit from a certification perspective is good processes, and we think that, you know, it's an interesting question because the controls are quite flexible in their approach, and because they're not mandatory and you can introduce different ones. And certainly different attributes for those controls. We think it's a very flexible system. So I don't believe it's one-dimensional, restrictive in its approach, but the controls are part of the process of implementation for information security.
It's a brilliant question because of the fact that it actually highlights an issue with 27001 that we've always had, which is small organizations say it's too restrictive, and large organizations say, and more mature organizations, shall we say that it's too loose and that it's not prescriptive enough. So it's about the quality in the implementation. But and I think a follow-up comment was that, you know, there was a worry or a concern that people are just using the guidance 27002 just purely as a, you know, as the only tool. You know, there are many other tools within your tool kit bag that you should be bringing to bear on this. So yeah, good question.
It was an interesting one. It leads on to another one from a consultant who was once of this parish. Now you can probably guess who it is, but the question is around the auditing, the audit cycle, breaking it down according to the control groups and the 14 distinctive audits. The question is, given the reduction in groups, what is your view on how to approach the audits with the new standard?
That's a brilliant question, because it's one that certainly myself and you know, and Lee, we've struggled. Well, I say struggled. We've looked at this over the last 6 or 7 months. So certainly when the draft the draft of the standard came out, it's something that we've been looking at how to best structure the audits. There's nothing stopping you. If you look at the standard and you look at the new clauses that Rob's just mentioned there, you know, you still have physical security controls within it. You still have operational controls. You still have compliance controls. So there's nothing stopping you from, you know, structuring it in exactly the same way. And that's something that Lee and I sort of hit on around Christmas time. We were kind of saying, look, how do we actually approach this? And it was like, well, why throw the baby out with the bathwater? You know, the way it was structured before was no bad thing, as long as when you're looking at the audits through, you know, through the life cycle, because again, you don't have to do it all in 1 year, you do it through the life cycle. As long as you've hit all those key areas and the controls that are within scope, you know, the way that we're going to approach it, and certainly I'm approaching it already with a number of clients, is to actually say, look, I'm going to come and audit you against your business continuity capabilities and your incident management processes. And now within that, I can weave in some of the the business continuity for cloud and that type of thing. ICT for business continuity. So it's just about bringing those into the current framework. So yeah, again, you've got that transition over the period. So yeah, that's how we're approaching it. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think from the certification body perspective, I would say, good certification bodies will be reaching out to you to give you, some information about how that process will work moving forwards. We, as a BSI, will also be sharing that information with our associate consultant partners. So, Cyberfort will be well placed to help you with that understanding as well prior to any audit process.
And I think one of the key aspects of that, going back to the attributes that Rob mentioned earlier, you can group around those attributes. So that might be an area that you're going to audit. You're going to look at the preventative controls or the detective controls, perhaps. But as to again underline something that Rob said earlier, we shouldn't miss is you can select your own attributes. They're not mandatory. So if you wanted to do that, that's kind of what Lee and I sort of just hit on. We were like, well, why throw away this? This is a physical attribute to the security, and and you can bring in other aspects that previously maybe didn't sit under suppliers, but you might look at the physical security controls around suppliers, etc. So yeah, so it's just another attribute perhaps that you can look to group and audit against that.
Okay. I've been asked if you can talk a little about the ACP program and how Cyberfort and its clients can benefit from it.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So as I mentioned at the beginning there, as a certification body, we carry all sorts of accreditation from UCAS and ANAB, and we're members of the Association of British Certification Bodies. That restricts, as rightly it should do, the activities that we can provide to our clients in relation to any form of consultancy. So of course from the assurance side, we can provide training, and we do the certification side, but we can't help organizations to negotiate the implementation of standards in a way that gets them ready for certification, because it's a conflict of interest, as I mentioned before. But UCAS and ANAB and other accreditation bodies, ILAC signatories to the multilateral agreement, have agreed that certification bodies can have programs of consultants whereby we can refer consultants to clients who are in need of consultancy to help them with that process, and it gives a more holistic service. So we work with our members of the Associate Consultants Program. We're not, as a certification body, allowed to and permitted to recommend or endorse consultants, but we can refer them across. Now, clearly, as part of that process, to protect our own brand reputation, we have to make sure that those consultants within the program exceed technical competence. Right? We have to have a high degree of confidence in the fact that they're able to support clients through consultancy services. So we do an assessment process which is quite rigorous, as Gary would attest to make sure that they meet those requirements. So the way that it basically works is this: if clients are in need of consultancy, we can refer consultants to them, and then the clients will do their own due diligence with the consultant to make sure they're a good fit and contract with them entirely independently from anything that we do as a certification body. But it's a hugely valuable service, in my opinion. And I personally learned quite a lot from working with our associate consultants program there. They're very, very skilled and have a lot of expertise in the sectors that they work in. So it's useful for BSI as well.
Great. Question here. I've got one. I don't know who I'm going to field this to, but do ISO 27001 CIS, LI, and LA certifications remain extant following the updates?
Do they what? Sorry.
Do they remain extant following the updates?
Does that mean, are you talking about certification or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't actually have the answer to that one. I can find out if, unless Gary, you're able to input there.
Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah, no problem. Do ISO 27001, CIS, LI, and LA certifications remain extant following the updates?
I think they'll, okay, if I understand the question correctly, so apologies for this. Yes, I mean, in terms of, will you need to look at the controls? Absolutely. You know, again, from 27001 perspective, well, you've got, I mean, there's two key things to remember here. 27001, to my understanding, isn't changing dramatically in terms of, you know, the actual structure, the framework of it. You know, there's going to be some clarification around some of the terms and such, but you've got to remember that ISO 27001 as a structure, you know, context of organization, leadership, operations, planning support, you know, improvements, etc. That framework won't be changing. So there'll be some things within it that will be changing. The Annex A controls are the ones that have changed dramatically, which is what Rob's gone through. So if you're looking at the current controls, CIS controls version 8, for instance, will they still be applicable? Yeah, absolutely. Again, the security controls framework that's out there currently, that's freely available, I think, on the web. Certainly, I've pored over that, and I've mapped against the new 27002 against NIST, CIS controls, SOC 2, and various other frameworks. So will they stay in place? Yeah, absolutely. They'll still be applicable once the change happens. I hope that answers the question. I like to do it as fully as possible, obviously.
I'll have to leave that down to the person asking the question. It sounded comprehensive to me, Gary.
Okay.
Question around, yeah, well, yes, that's a better answer, isn't it? Yeah. A question around data governance. With the changes to ISO 27001, will GDPR be included because of the changed clauses?
Again, Rob, I'll leave you to have a think and see if you've got another answer. But I think there's a recognition or a deeper recognition of personal information within the new standard or the new Annex A controls. You've got the two new areas, which is data masking and data leakage prevention. So, you know, the purpose of the data masking is to limit the exposure of sensitive data, including PII, and to comply with legal and statutory and regulatory requirements. And then you've got data leakage prevention, again, you know, to detect and prevent unauthorized disclosure and extraction of information, which again lends itself a little bit more towards personal information. So yes, again, GDPR Article 32, security of processing, talks about implementing appropriate technical and organizational security measures to protect the rights and freedoms of data subjects. So ISO 27001 does that in spades. If you wanted to go further than that, you would look at ISO 27701, which is the personal, you know, that's the extension to 27001. But it's certainly, I think, if there was a data breach in your organization, the three things that the ICO want to know is, what did you do to prevent it? What did you do when you discovered it? And what are you doing to prevent it from happening again? And if you don't have something like ISO 27001, you're going to be pretty much on the back foot, depending upon the size and scale of your organization. So 27001, new and old, you know, absolutely underline the importance, you know, the ability to protect personal data.
Yeah, I just add to that and say I completely agree with Gary's points there. I mean, if you meet the requirements of 27001, it goes a long way to supporting GDPR compliance within the scope of what the standard covers. What I would say is GDPR, of course, is it's a European regulation. So this is as an international standard, wouldn't necessarily reference it directly because it's not applicable outside of the EU. So, but absolutely, if you have compliance to 27001, then it's a massive step in the right direction.
Great, thank you. I had a question. Any sneaky insights into what we can expect of 27001 2022?
Well, I definitely can't answer that because I haven't seen the draft. So don't know if Gary could.
Yes, I can give you sneak preview. What am I allowed to say? There will be. It's not going to be earth-shattering. This is not revolutionary. It's evolutionary, and the key aspects that I understand are changing are around the risk management and risk treatment process, which doesn't surprise me. So it's clarification on some of the terms and some of the processes around risk management and risk treatment, which when you think about what ISO 27001 is, at its heart, it's a risk management system, and which is focused on security, obviously. So yeah, so that's about the only thing I think I'm able to say.
Okay, sneaky input, thank you. I think we've exhausted the questions now. Do we have any more questions from the attendees? It's sometimes difficult to think of questions as you're listening.
So I will come back to you, Kevin, and Gary with the answers to the questions that I couldn't answer. How easy is it to align 27701 to 27001? Yeah, Gary, do you want to take that first?
Yeah. So the answer to that is very, very easy. It's an extension. If you've done 27001. The additional controls, there are very few controls in actual fact which just simply extend the current controls, so, and they sit really well within it. So yeah, very easy. So definitely, if you've not looked at 27701, I would definitely advise you take a look at it, because the key thing was Rob's going to answer some of the other questions, just to remember as well. And this is an important point, there is no such thing as GDPR compliant or Data Protection Act compliant, because it's an outcome focused regulation. So all you can do is build up a body of evidence to demonstrate that you have done what is appropriate for the size and complexity of your organizations and the kind of data that you're processing. So I would always advise any organization that is processing large amounts of personal data and certainly sensitive data, that they not only look at 27001, but they then extend that and look at 27701 as well. So gap analysis on the two is where we come in and say, right, we're going to assess you against data protection, information security, and privacy. So to make sure that we cover all bases. So it's not just what you do with data. It's not just how you process data, it's what you do with it and how you use it.
Yeah,
so
sorry, Gary, carry on.
No, go for it, Rob.
Just a quick one, just to say, the 27,000, as with all standards, they're designed to be complementary. They're written in a way that they automatically align, so they kind of overlay, and the 27,001 suite do this really well. I think my answer would be relatively easy rather than very easy, but it depends on what processes you already have in place.
Makes sense, Rob. Okay, so some more questions coming. How long will it be before BSI are ready to certify against the new certification?
So there's a couple of.
I think they may have missed it earlier.
They didn't, but there's a couple of variables in the answer. Unfortunately, the first one is when will the standard be published, and the second one is what's the transition period. So, I mean, we will be ready to offer certification against the new standard once it's published, but we don't know what the publication date is. So, I think that probably as close as I could get to an answer on that one.
That's fair enough.
But I think it's a great question again, and this comes down to organisations recognising that the Annex A controls are a set of controls that you can implement. As I say, I've worked with organisations who have implemented or utilised PCI because that's kind of where their world is, and NIST and various others as a control set. Your certificate might have ISO 27001. 2013/17 on it, but there's nothing stopping you from taking a look at the Annex A controls that have already been published, which are in 27002, and using that control set. So you can elect to use that control set from 2022, but when the new standard comes out, that's when you'll get the shiny new badge on there. You say that's where it will say 27001. 2022 on it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Gary.
So I'm starting to see people come to me saying we're really interested in this standard because we've seen you posted a blog about the new controls. We want those new controls. We're doing this now. Can we use the new controls? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? Why would I implement you an Annex A set of controls on 114 controls, which in 6 months' time, I'm then going to have to reduce it and do some form of gap analysis. We're going to use the new set of controls right now, which is one of the reasons why Lee and I spent a lot of time literally pulling this thing apart, word, paragraph by paragraph, line by line, word by word, to see, how this actually all now interrelates. And I think that, having that level of understanding of what the standard now looks like gives us a real great insight into, being able to help clients and such, be able to transition. And the first step, by the way, and this is my advice to anyone out there, is to look at those 11 new controls and audit against them. That's step one. Go and do it. Go and take a look at those new 11 controls and audit against it.
Great. Well, you've stolen the thunder of a question I had for you, Gary, which was I think you just answered it there. But for the people on this call, what would be the best first step to take to prepare for the changes?
Okay, this is my favorite actually. So actually, there's a step before the one that I just mentioned, because this is always my favorite. When I used to say to people back in 2018, who's confused by GDPR? Everyone would put their hand up and say, yeah, I'm confused. And I would say, okay, now put your hand up, who has read GDPR? And then about 90% of the room would put their hand down. And my response would be, well, no wonder you're confused because you haven't read it. So you need to read it. So step one, go and buy a copy of the standard, of the guidance 27002. So that you have the guidance, so you know what it actually is the purpose is, because they've changed that. Again, this is what I love about wordplay within the standard itself and the guidance is, it's important. They've changed. It's not an objective anymore. It's not a control objective. It's a purpose. So what is the purpose of this control that you're implementing? And then it gives you guidance in terms of, well, if we're telling you to put in network monitoring or continuous monitoring for physical security, for instance, then this is what we mean. This is the kind of thing that we expect from you. So you can then take a look at that guidance and say, right, we don't do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, but we definitely do A, and we do a little bit of C, and then we do a little bit of G. Is that enough for us? And that's a risk-based question. So step one, go and buy the guidance. And then step two, read it, reread it, do what Lee and I have done, rewrite it, as in write it out so you can see each and every single word of it. This is obviously for the geeks out there, probably easier just to get, us to come in and help you. But yeah, just dive into it and just see what the changes are. And then look at those controls, look at your organization through the lens of that guidance.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Gary. Our sort of typical customer journey starts with buying a standard. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. read the standard, understand the standard. You'll need support probably in doing that, whether that's training or consultancy or possibly a gap analysis from your certification body. That would be brave, but it's a route some people choose. And then if you feel certification is valuable, then you go through the audit process, the stage 2, stage 1, and then through to certification. And a word on, certification is not mandatory, but it's generally accepted to be hugely valuable in demonstrating to stakeholders that you're compliant to a particular standard. We see more and more in tenders now, people requesting 27001 certification or compliance in tender documents, and it's just becoming more prevalent as we go forward. So certification, whichever certification body is right for you, is generally speaking a valuable thing to do.
That's really interesting. Well, from your experience, why do most people seek ISO 27001 certification? Is there a general trend? Has it changed recently?
So certificate is an interesting question. So typically, and this is not specific to 27001, people achieve certification because somebody else has told them they have to have it in the supply chain. And the secondary reason would be for differentiation. So is to put themselves above their competitors. And the third one would be to improve operating processes. Now, the third one always happens as a sort of byproduct of the first two, but we typically see, the certification being driven by external influence.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I've got a clarification or a question, I guess, for Rob. I think based upon one of the questions that was asked earlier about the new standard. I think the question was around about ISO 27001 and about the I think the words the letters you used were LI and LEI or something like that, Kevin. And I think it was probably aiming towards lead implementer courses and lead auditor courses. So Rob,
there's clarification in that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of people who have let's just say somebody's just spent a bit of money and they've gone through the lead implementer course for 27001. What will happen when the new standard comes out? Will they still be lead implementers? Can they still say, I'm a lead implementer of 27001 if it has changed?
Certainly during the transition period, which we've established will be quite a long time, then obviously the training remains valid during that period, and it's wouldn't be mandatory to sort of do a refresher on that, but it's always a recommendation that when the standards change, there's kind of an obligation there. If you are a lead implementer, lead auditor, then you need to be averse of the changes to the standard and revisions and the new requirements. Otherwise, the auditing that you do will be outdated. So obviously not everybody updates, but it's always a good thing to do that. Yeah. That was a bit of a vague answer, but
I think it did clarify it. And I've got a question. It's a bit of a loaded question, but it is one that was asked recently, and it was around the auditing process. So for most people, I think we know there's a stage 1 audit and then there's a stage 2 audit. Do you think it's likely that UCAS will change its rules around the number of days that are required for a stage 1 and stage 2 based upon the new standard having 93 controls rather than the 114?
I don't know the answer to that. My guess would be it's unlikely. I think when we spoke before about the reduction from 114 to 93, what you probably need to take into consideration is the merging of the of some of the old controls into one control. It doesn't mean necessarily that the audit process will be less, because although there's less controls, the functionality of those controls has increased. So the audit process will probably be more or less about the same, but I don't honestly know the answer to that question. I will try to find out and let you know.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Rob, if you'd have had an answer, I would have been absolutely amazed and delighted, but it's not an easy one to answer, because I know that, UCAS are the governing body and you guys have to, audit organisations against 27006. So it would be interesting to see if that was going to be revised.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and if I can find an answer to that, I will share it with you.
Cool, thanks. It's one for the ACP programme next time we meet.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from attendees, please? I think we may have exhausted them for now. What we'll do then, so if you have any questions after the event, there are a couple that we just don't know yet. So for the transition time and the certification timeframes for when we're going to be able to do that. But we'll take your questions after. I'll post my email address in the comments section. Please feel free to reach out to me as a point of contact. I can then redirect to Gary or Rob, depending on the subject matter. And yeah, we'll keep you up to date with changes. All I'd like to say is just to everyone who's attended this morning, thank you so much. I hope you've found that useful and informative. I certainly have. Rob, thank you so much. Really fascinating insight from BSI Group. Really appreciated. Gary, your knowledge and your generosity with sharing that knowledge is always much appreciated. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. No, it's been great. No, thanks. And yeah, just echo your words. Thanks to everyone who's attended and has shown an interest in this. I would just simply say, you know, please do keep on talking about this. It's an important topic and we need more people to understand it. Yeah, and again, thanks Rob for being a part of this. You know, the BSI. You know, obviously, we often describe it and say, you know, you should go speak to the BSI because these are the guys who write the standards, so they know what they're talking about. So
yeah, and I would say, as I said at the start, I'm not a technical expert, so the people that you'll be talking to will be far more knowledgeable than I am, so they won't be deferring any of your questions.
No, that's great. Okay, well, I look forward to seeing you on the next ACP event. And but yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Take care.